Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are not just stepping into a topic. We are stepping into what feels like a battlefield. And I really don't say that to be dramatic.
No, it's true.
We are looking at a figure who occupies a space in the modern world that is, well, it's almost impossible to reconcile. On one hand, you have a philosopher who receives the Adorno Prize, which is the highest cultural honor in Germany.
A huge deal.
A huge deal. And on the other hand, you have a person who, while visiting Brazil for a conference on, of all things, democracy, was burned in effigy by a furious mob in the streets of São Paulo.
It is. I mean, it's a level of polarization that you usually reserve for heads of state or, revolutionaries, not for an academic who spends their time analyzing French post-structuralism and German idealism.
Exactly. We are talking about Judith Butler. Now, if you've set foot on a university campus in the last 30 years, or if you've scrolled through some of the darker corners of Twitter, you know the name.
Yeah.
You definitely know the buzzwords. Gender is a construct. Performativity. Queer theory. These phrases have become cultural shorthand.
And that's precisely the problem, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When ideas become shorthand, they lose their texture, they lose their rigor.
Yeah.
Butler has become a symbol for a certain kind of culture war, a stand-in for everything people love or, hate about modern progressivism.
Right.
But the actual work, it's dense, it's challenging, and it's surprisingly different from the slogans you see on the T-shirts.
That is our mission today. We're going to strip away the memes and the outrage and actually look at the text. We have a massive stack of sources here. Biographies, the dense theoretical books from the late 80s, the political writings post 9/11, all the way up to the 2024 release, Who's Afraid of Gender?
It's a huge body of work.
It is. And we want to understand not just what Judith Butler thinks, but how they think and why this specific thinker has become the lightning rod for global debates on everything from, bathrooms to foreign policy.
And it's worth noting that while gender is the headline, the scope is so much broader. Butler gives us a toolkit for understanding violence, mourning, language, and really what it actually means to be a human subject in a world that is constantly trying to define you.
So I have to ask the question that I know is on everyone's mind before we start. Butler is legendary for being difficult to read, right?
Yeah.
I remember hearing about a bad writing award years ago.
They absolutely did win that award back in the late 90s, and we're going to talk about that because Butler actually has a fascinating defense for why the writing has to be difficult.
Oh, I'm interested to hear that.
But my promise to you and the listeners is that today we're going to do the translation work. We're going to take those complex sentences and hopefully turn them into those aha moments.
I love that. So let's rewind the clock. Because when I look at the biography, I sort of expected to see someone born in a Parisian cafe, debating Sartre. But the origin story is much more American heartland.
Cleveland, Ohio, 1956. That is where it begins. But to understand the environment, you really have to look at the lineage. Butler was born into a family of Hungarian Jewish and Russian-Jewish descent. And this isn't just trivia, it's foundational. Most of their maternal grandmother's family was murdered in the Holocaust.
Wow. So that shadow of state violence, of just catastrophic loss, it's there before Butler even speaks a word.
It's the atmosphere of the home. Butler grew up in a practicing Reform Jewish household, went to Hebrew school, the whole 9 yards. But there is this incredible anecdote from their childhood that I think is the skeleton key to understanding Butler's entire intellectual life.
The punishment story, I saw this in the notes and I couldn't believe it was real.
It's very real. So imagine a young Judith Butler in Hebrew school. Extremely bright, but also what the teachers called talkative.
A troublemaker.
A bit of a clown.
Mm-hmm.
Butler was the kid asking too many questions, disrupting the flow. So the rabbi decides that Butler needs to be disciplined.
Okay, usually that means detention or writing, I will not talk in class on a blackboard 100 times.
Not for this rabbi, no. He assigned Butler special ethics tutorials. It was essentially a private philosophy class as a punishment.
That is the best punishment I ever heard of.
Right. But here's where it gets wild. At age 14, Butler wasn't just reading the basics. They asked the rabbi to study 3 specific topics. First, why Baruch Spinoza was excommunicated from the synagogue.
Okay, that's a heavy hitter for a 14-year-old. Spinoza is not light reading.
Not at all. Second, whether German idealism, the high philosophy of Kant and Hegel, could be held accountable for the rise of Nazism. And third, existential theology.
My God. At 14, I was trying to figure out how to get out of gym class. Butler's asking if the entire structure of German rationality accidentally created the Third Reich.
Exactly. And just think about what that signals. It signals a mind that is deeply engaged with its own community, Butler didn't run away from the synagogue. They dug deeper into it. But it's also a mind that is obsessed with the failures of authority.
Right. Why was this guy kicked out for thinking differently?
Why was Spinoza kicked out? How did this civilized philosophy of Germany fail to stop, or maybe even, enable the Holocaust? It's this constant questioning of the rules, even the rules of your own team.
It sets the stage perfectly. It's this blend of, insider knowledge and outsider critique. It's a rebellion, but a scholarly rebellion.
Precisely. That intellectual DNA takes Butler to Bennington College and then to Yale for a PhD. And interestingly, the early work isn't about gender or sexuality at all. It's about that heavy German stuff. Hegel, phenomenology, the mechanisms of desire and recognition.
Which is, I guess, the direct line from those punishment tutorials.
It really is. It's all about how we become who we are in relation to others and to power.
Which brings us to the late 80s, the moment the academic earth shook. We have to talk about the book that launched 1,000 dissertations, Gender Trouble.
We do.
Yeah.
But to really, really grasp Gender Trouble, which dropped in 1990, we need to look at a precursor essay from 1988 called Performative Acts and Gender Constitution. This is where the concept of performativity is born.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because performativity is one of those words that everyone uses, but I feel like 90% of us are using it wrong. When I hear performance, I think of a stage play. I think of an actor putting on a costume.
Right, and that is the most common misunderstanding. People think Butler is saying, I wake up in the morning, I go to my closet, and I decide to perform man today. Tomorrow I might perform woman, as if it's a singular voluntary choice, like putting on a hat.
And Butler says that is not it.
Butler explicitly rejects that. To understand performativity, you have to go back to linguistics. There's a philosopher of language named J.L. Austin who talked about speech acts.
Speech acts, okay.
He pointed out that there are some things you say that don't just describe the world, they actually do something in the world. They bring something into being.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so the classic example is when a judge says, I sentence you to 10 years in prison. The judge isn't describing a prison sentence that already exists. His words create the sentence. They make it real.
Or when a couple says, I do, at a wedding.
Exactly. The words change their legal status. They aren't just reporting on a feeling. They're performing an action that has consequences. Those are performative utterances.
Okay, so the language creates the reality. I'm with you so far.
Now, apply that to gender. Butler argues that gender is not an internal truth. It's not a soul or a biological destiny radiating from your core. Instead, gender is a set of acts repeated over time. It is the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you sit, the way you dress, all of these things.
So it's a script.
It is a script that has been rehearsed for centuries. And this is the key. We perform it so often, and everyone around us performs it so consistently that we forget it's a script. We start to believe that the acts are the result of an internal gender. Butler flips it. The acts create the illusion of the internal gender. The repetition of the performance is what makes gender feel real and natural.
So when a doctor says it's a girl, that isn't a description of the baby.
No. Butler argues that it's a girl is a performative speech act. It is the first command. It's the director yelling action. It sets the script in motion. The pink blanket, the name, the tone of voice used, the expectations, the girling of the child begins immediately.
That is a mind-bending shift because the old feminist slogan was sex is biological, gender is social, sex is the hardware, gender is the software.
Right, the classic distinction. Sex is between the legs, gender is between the ears. That was the consensus, and Butler blew that up in Gender Trouble. They argued that sex itself, the biological categorization, is also socially constructed.
Hold on. How can biology be socially constructed? Bodies are real, right? I mean, chromosomes, hormones, they exist.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a huge point of confusion. Butler isn't saying bodies don't exist. They aren't saying matter isn't real, but they are saying that we can never access the body raw. We always view the body through the lens of our culture, our language, our expectations.
So we're wearing gender glasses all the time.
You are. When a doctor looks at an ultrasound or a newborn, they aren't just seeing tissue. They're looking for specific signs that allow them to categorize that tissue into a binary system, male or female, that our society invented and is deeply invested in.
So the binary isn't a fact of nature. It's a grid we place over nature.
Exactly. And because we are so committed to that grid, we ignore or even surgically correct the complexity of biology, things like intersex traits, hormonal variations, to force everything into those two neat boxes.
So it's less a scientific fact and more a regulatory system.
It's a regulatory system, and that system creates trouble for anyone who doesn't fit.
Yeah. If you don't perform the script correctly, you are punished. You are seen as wrong or unnatural or sick.
Your very existence is called into question.
But if it is a script, scripts can be rewritten, right? That seems to be the hopeful part of the theory.
That was the glimmer of hope Butler offered. If gender is built through repetition, doing the same acts over and over again, then maybe we can disrupt it by subversive repetition, by doing the acts wrong, by glitching the system.
And this is where the drag queens come in.
This is where Paris is Burning comes in, the seminal 1990 documentary on New York's drag ball culture. Butler analyzes this film to make a crucial point about imitation.
Which is?
Well, people often think drag is a fake version of a real woman. It's a man imitating a woman.
That's the common understanding, yeah.
Butler says no. Drag reveals that being a woman is itself a performance. When a drag queen exaggerates the walk, the makeup, the hair, the mannerisms, they're exposing the fact that cisgender women are also performing those things. They're just performing them in a way that's considered natural.
So there is no original.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're all copying a copy of a copy. Drag just admits it, exposes the imitative structure of all gender. It pulls back the curtain.
I can see why this blew people's minds. I mean, it's a fundamental reordering of how we think about identity, but it also led to that criticism we touched on. The idea that gender is just a whim. Gender voluntarism.
Right. And this was a huge problem for Butler. Critics said, oh, so I can just change my gender like I change my socks.
Yeah.
It was a massive, and I think often willful, misreading of the work.
So Butler had to come back and say, no, that's not it at all.
They spent the next decade saying, no, that is not what I meant. And that leads us to the 1993 book, Bodies That Matter. This was basically the sequel written to fix the misunderstandings of the first movie.
The correction.
It was the clarification. And this is where Butler introduces a concept called constitutive constraint.
Okay, that sounds dense. Break it down for me.
It means we are made by norms we didn't choose. You are born into a language you didn't invent. You're born into a body you didn't select. You're constrained by what Butler calls the matrix of intelligibility, the rules of what makes a person make sense to others. You can't just wake up one morning and decide to step outside of that instantly.
So we are improvising, but we are improvising inside a straitjacket.
Or at least inside a very rigid stage set. You can push the walls, you can bend the bars, but you are formed by the very things that limit you. Performativity isn't a free-for-all. It is repetition under pressure. The materiality of the body is real, but we can only understand that materiality through the language and culture available to us.
That pressure, I imagine, creates a lot of psychological weight. And this leads us to the late 90s work, specifically Excitable Speech from 1997. This is where Butler starts talking about language and censorship.
And this work is incredibly relevant right now. I mean, we are constantly debating hate speech, cancel culture, and what the government should or shouldn't ban.
And usually the progressive stance is ban hate speech, use the state to protect vulnerable people.
And Butler, the ultimate progressive icon, says, wait, be careful.
Why? That seems counterintuitive.
Butler relies on Foucault here. The argument is about power. If you ask the state to define what hate speech is, you are giving the state the power to define the limits of all language.
And the state might not always be your friend.
Exactly. That's a massive understatement. If you create a legal weapon to ban injurious speech, that weapon can be turned around and used against you. A conservative government might decide that teaching about systemic racism is injurious speech against white students.
Or that displaying a pride flag is hate speech against religious people, which is not hypothetical. We are seeing that happen right now.
We are. Butler warned that marginalized groups should be very, very wary of giving the state the power of censorship because the state usually protects the status quo. By appealing to the state for protection, you may end up reinforcing the very power that oppresses you.
There's a paradox there.
A huge one. But there's a deeper point in excitable speech, too, something Butler calls the linguistic I.
The I as in myself.
Yes. Butler asks a really fundamental question. How do we become a subject who can say I? How do we get an identity in the first place?
I've never really thought about that.
Butler argues that we form ourselves through a kind of primal censorship. We learn to speak by learning what not to say. As children, we're told, Don't say that. We don't talk like that. We prune away the parts of ourselves that are unspeakable or unacceptable just to become intelligible to others.
So becoming a normal person involves a kind of self-violence, a cutting away of possibilities.
A melancholic loss, yes.
Yeah.
We sacrifice parts of our potential humanity to fit into the norms of language and society. And this happens so early we don't even remember it.
That is profound. It connects right back to the gender theory. We kill off the parts of us that don't fit the boy or girl box just to survive socially.
Precisely. And that theme of survival, of who gets to survive and who doesn't, takes a very dark and literal turn as we move into the 2000s.
September 11, 2001. The world changes. And looking at the bibliography, Butler's work changes too. It pivots from, gender theory to political philosophy and war.
It does. Though Butler would say it isn't a pivot, but an expansion. The question moves from how are bodies gendered to how are bodies destroyed. The key texts here are Precarious Life from 2004 and Frames of War from 2009.
And the central question that haunts these books is, when is life grievable?
It's such a powerful question. Think back to the days immediately after 9/11 in the U.S. The New York Times ran the portraits of grief. We saw the faces, the names, the favorite hobbies, the little life stories of the people who died in the towers.
It was heartbreaking. They were fully humanized. We were invited to mourn them as individuals.
They were publicly mourned. Their lives were framed as grievable. Now contrast that with the response. The U.S. began bombing Afghanistan and later invaded Iraq. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians died. Did we see their photos in the New York Times? Did we read about their favorite hobbies?
No. We saw numbers, collateral damage, faceless casualties.
Butler argues that those lives were cast as ungrievable. It isn't just that they died. It is that they were framed from the outset as lives that never truly counted in the first place. Their deaths were not registered as a loss in the same way.
They are ghosts before they are even dead.
Exactly. And the danger is that if a life is ungrievable, you can destroy it without it being considered a crime, a tragedy, a murder. If you kill a grievable person, it is murder. If you kill an ungrievable person, it is just mechanics. It is just war. It's national security.
And Butler focuses a lot on Guantanamo Bay in this period.
Yes, as the perfect example of this, the state of exception. This is a concept Butler explores deeply. The U.S. government created a legal black hole in Guantanamo. The detainees weren't criminals within the U.S. justice systems. They didn't have rights to a trial.
Right.
But they also weren't classified as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention.
So they were legally nothing. They had no status.
They were stripped of personhood. They were living, breathing bodies with no legal existence. Butler argues that the state produces its sovereignty, its ultimate power, by deciding who gets to have rights and who doesn't. By suspending the law for these people, the state shows it is above the law.
So if the reaction to injury like 9/11 is to lash out, to make ourselves invulnerable, and to make others ungrievable, what is the alternative? Because that desire for revenge, for security, it feels very human.
It is human. But Butler argues that the quest for total invulnerability is a fantasy that leads to endless war. You can never be completely safe, so you will always find another enemy to destroy. Instead, Butler proposes vulnerability as a resource.
That sounds counterintuitive. Usually vulnerability is a weakness we're told to overcome.
Butler reframes it. We are all, by definition, vulnerable. We are precarious. My body can be hurt by you. Your body can be hurt by me. We need food, shelter, and other people to survive. We are fundamentally interdependent from the moment we're born.
So we are fragile by design. We can't escape it.
Yes. And instead of trying to armor ourselves against that reality, which is impossible, Butler suggests we should build our ethics upon it. If I recognize that you are just as precarious as I am, that our bodies are equally fragile, that creates a shared responsibility.
It's an ethics of shared fragility.
Exactly. It is a plea for nonviolence based not on high ideals or religious commandments, but on the brute physical reality of our bodies.
And this idea of making life livable bridges the gap back to the gender work, doesn't it? In 2004, Butler published Undoing Gender.
Yes, and this book is often described as being a bit more accessible than Gender Trouble. It's less focused on deconstructing French philosophy and more on the human cost of these rigid norms.
The central question seems to be, what does a person need to have a livable life?
Right. It's not just an academic theory. It's about survival. If you are recognized as a valid subject, if you're trans or intersex or gender nonconforming, your life can become unlivable. You face violence, discrimination, a lack of medical care, a sense of profound alienation.
There is a specific case in Undoing Gender that I found absolutely heartbreaking and really clarifying. the David Reimer case.
It is a tragedy, but it is essential to understanding Butler's view on the nature versus nurture debate. David Reimer was born male in the 1960s. As an infant, a botched medical procedure destroyed his genitalia.
And the doctors, specifically a famous expert named John Money, decided that since gender is learned, they could just make him a girl.
It was the ultimate test of the blank slate theory. It was nurture in its most extreme form. They castrated him, named him Brenda, and told the parents to raise him as a daughter. Give him dolls, put him in dresses, never tell him the truth. The theory was that the social script would override everything else.
And it failed.
Yeah,
Catastrophically.
spectacularly and tragically. David, as Brenda, never felt female. He was miserable, bullied, and felt deeply wrong. Eventually, as a teenager, he discovered the truth, transitioned back to living as a man, but the trauma was so severe he eventually died by suicide.
Now, I can hear the critics screaming right now, see, Judith Butler is wrong. Biology is real. You can't just perform gender. This proves it.
But that is the most fascinating part. Butler analyzes this case to argue the exact opposite of what you might expect. Butler doesn't side with the doctor, with the nurture argument. Butler sides with David.
Wait, really?
Yes. Butler argues that David Reimer's story proves the violence of norms. The doctors tried to force a gender script on a body, on a person, that rejected it. That coercion, that forcing, is the violence Butler fights against.
So it doesn't matter what the script is. The violence is in the forcing of the script.
Exactly. The enemy is the system that says you must be this. Butler defends the right of the individual to determine their own reality against the medical and social authorities who claim to know better. It's an argument for radical self-determination.
That is a crucial nuance. It's about autonomy. And speaking of autonomy and identity, we should mention Butler's own evolution here. The notes say Butler is now legally non-binary.
Yes, in California. Butler uses share and they-them pronouns, but has expressed a preference for they-them. And they've said in interviews that they were never at home with the assignment of female at birth.
Which just adds such a layer of personal resonance to all this high theory. When Butler writes about being homeless in language or not fitting the categories, it isn't just abstract.
It is lived experience. And that brings us right to the present day. Because if you thought the gender wars of the 90s were intense, the 2020s are a supernova. And Butler is right in the center of it with the 2024 book, Who's Afraid of Gender?
This book feels like Butler entering the ring against the modern anti-gender movement. We see this global rise of rhetoric in the U.S., in Hungary, in Italy, in Russia, railing against gender ideology.
Butler analyzes this phenomena and calls it a phantasm.
The ghost, a fantasy.
A created monster. Butler argues that for the far right, the word gender has been detached from its actual meaning. It has become a container for every anxiety people have about modernity, about change, about the economy, about national identity.
It's the boogeyman. It's the scapegoat for everything.
It is portrayed as a foreign force. It's often called Western in the East or Marxist in the West, that is coming to destroy the family, destroy the nation, destroy God, and even destroy biology itself.
It sounds like a classic conspiracy theory.
It functions exactly like one. And Butler points out the fundamental incoherence of the movement. Think about it. On one hand, critics say gender is fake, it's a construct, it's weak nonsense, it's just feelings.
Oh, right. They dismiss it.
But on the other hand, they claim it is a terrifyingly powerful ideology that can brainwash children instantly and topple entire civilizations.
So it's both weak and strong at the same time. Pathetic and all-powerful.
Which, as Butler points out, citing the scholar Umberto Eco, is a classic feature of fascism. The enemy must be simultaneously ridiculed as weak and feared as an existential threat. This confusion, this contradiction, is a feature, not a bug. It allows leaders to mobilize pure, unthinking anxiety.
And this rhetoric has very real-world consequences. We mentioned the effigy burning in Brazil earlier.
2017, São Paulo. Butler was there for a conference on democracy. Not even on gender, but a mob gathered outside the venue. They built a puppet of Butler dressed as a witch. They burned it in the street.
That is medieval imagery, a witch burning.
Absolutely. They held signs calling Butler the Antichrist and accusing them of coming to destroy the identity of children. It shows how visceral this phantasm has become. Butler wasn't a person to that crowd. Butler was a symbol of existential dread.
And this tension spills into the media, too. There was a controversy with The Guardian in the UK in 2021 regarding a comparison to fascism.
Yes, this was a big one. In an interview, Butler compared the anti-gender movement, specifically including TERF ideology, which is trans exclusionary radical feminism, to fascism.
That is a very volatile comparison to make.
A very charged comparison. Butler argued that both groups share a structure of thought.
Yeah.
The desire to purge the impure, to save a pure category, whether that category is the nation or womanhood. The Guardian published the interview, but after a massive backlash from gender-critical activists online, they deleted that specific section of the interview.
Just scrubbed it from the article.
Gone. Vanished. Which, of course, triggered the Streisand effect. The internet exploded. People asked, why is a major liberal newspaper censoring a world-renowned philosopher for making a philosophical argument about political structures?
It proves Butler's point about censorship from excitable speech.
It really does. It showed that even discussing the structure of these arguments is considered so dangerous it must be silenced. Eventually, the paper reinstated the quote, but the whole affair was incredibly revealing.
Controversy really does follow Butler everywhere, and we cannot do a deep dive without addressing the other major pillar of Butler's activism and, well, controversy, Israel and Palestine.
This is a huge part of their public life, and arguably the most polarizing, even more so than the gender theory.
As we established, Butler is Jewish. Their ethics are deeply rooted in Jewish thought and the memory of the Holocaust, but they are a staunch critic of Zionism.
Butler supports BDS boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel. They describe their position as post-Zionist. They argue for a Judaism that is distinct from state violence. The ethical mandate of never again, in Butler's view, must apply to everyone, not just to Jews.
And this came to a head in 2012 when Butler won the Adorno Prize.
Theodor Adorno is a giant of critical theory, himself a German Jewish intellectual who fled the Nazis. Winning that prize is a massive honor. But when Butler was announced as the winner, the backlash was fierce. The Israeli ambassador to Germany called it a disgrace. Major Jewish groups accused Butler of anti-Semitism for their support of BDS.
Which must be an incredibly painful accusation for someone whose entire philosophy is built on the legacy of the Holocaust.
Butler responded forcefully. They wrote essays, gave interviews, and argued that criticizing the policies of the State of Israel is not anti-Semitism. They refused to let the Israeli state speak for all Jewish people or define what authentic Jewish identity is.
And this has continued right into the current conflict, the 2023-2024 war in Gaza.
It has been extremely contentious.
Yeah.
Butler condemned the October 7 massacre by Hamas. They called it terrifying and revolting. There was no ambiguity in their emotional reaction to the violence against civilians.
I thought a but.
There was a but. Butler insisted on contextualizing the violence within what they call 70 years of horrors of the occupation. And in a climate of raw grief and anger, many people hear context as justification.
There was a specific comment in Paris in March of 2024 that really set people off.
Yes. This created a firestorm. Butler was speaking at a meeting and got into a debate about definitions. Butler argued that the October 7 attack should be described as armed resistance. They stated it was not a terrorist attack in the traditional definition, although they did acknowledge it was an uprising and an attack on civilians.
That feels like splitting hairs in a burning building. To a normal person, saying it wasn't a terrorist attack seems designed to enrage people.
Butler was trying to make a technical academic point about asymmetric warfare, about how we define terror when a non-state actor fights a powerful state. But to the families of victims and to many, many observers, it sounded like a denial of the atrocity's nature. It sounded like an academic game being played over dead bodies.
And the consequences were real. The U.S. Department of Education is now probing UC Berkeley, where Butler teaches, for anti-Semitism, and Butler is named in that probe.
And true to form, Butler condemned the university for cooperating, calling them an informant. So yes, Butler is fighting this battle on every single front.
There is also that old clip from 2012 that always resurfaces in these debates. The
Right.
one where Butler is accused of calling Hamas and Hezbollah part of the global left.
It haunts them. The clip is real. Butler was at a teach-in and was asked if those groups belonged to the global left. Butler said yes, it's possible.
Which to most people sounds like an endorsement. I like these guys. They're on my team.
And that is how it is heard. But Butler's clarified this repeatedly over the years. It was a descriptive statement, not a normative one. It was a taxonomy question. These groups describe themselves as anti-imperialist. The left is traditionally anti-imperialist. Therefore, in the academic taxonomy of political science, they sit on the left.
So it's a categorization, not a thumbs up.
Exactly. Butler emphasized that you can be on the left and still be violent, wrong, misogynistic, homophobic, reactionary, and worthy of total criticism. But again, it is the philosopher answering a taxonomy question while the public is hearing a moral question.
It is the peril of the celebrity academic. You are speaking in footnotes, but the world is listening in sound bites.
Which brings us to the footnotes themselves. We teased the bad writing award at the beginning of the show.
1999, Dennis Dutton, a philosopher, gives Butler the first prize for bad writing. The critique is that the prose is impossible. It's a dense forest of jargon and convoluted sentences.
I have read Gender Trouble.
Okay.
It is chewy. It requires a lot of effort. It's not a beach read.
So why do it? Why not just write simply, gender is a script? Boom, done. Easy to understand.
But Butler has a defense for this, and it is actually quite compelling whether you agree with it or not. Butler argues that common sense is built into common language.
How so?
Our everyday grammar subject, verb, object reinforces the way we see the world. I hit the ball, the boy kissed the girl. The grammar reinforces the idea of a stable, pre-existing doer behind the deed. It reinforces the binary. It makes the world seem simple and fixed.
So if you write simply, you are just reinforcing the status quo with every sentence.
That's the argument. Butler believes that to challenge the common sense that oppresses people, you have to break the language that produces that common sense. You have to make the reader stumble. You have to make them work to understand the sentence, because that very work shifts their thinking away from the default settings.
So the difficulty is a feature, not a bug.
It is a political strategy, though honestly, many of their peers have criticized it too. Martha Nussbaum, another giant of philosophy, wrote a scathing takedown called The Professor of Parody.
Ouch, that's a title.
She accused Butler of quietism. She basically said, you are sitting in a room playing these complex word games while real women out in the world are suffering from violence and poverty. Your philosophy offers no clear path to legal reform, no path to better wages. It just offers subversive performance.
It is the classic clash, revolution of the mind versus revolution of the streets.
And that debate is still raging in activist and academic circles. Does high theory help the revolution, or does it just create a new elite club of people who know the secret password?
So we have gone from the troublemaker in Hebrew school to the professor of parody to the target of effigy burnings. We've covered gender, censorship, war, and the definition of the human. When you look at this whole arc, what is the through line? What connects it all?
I think the through line is the resistance to the unlivable.
Say more about that.
Whether it is the gender binary that forces a person like David Reimer to suicide, or the definition of citizenship that leaves a Guantanamo prisoner indefinitely detained in a legal black hole, or the definition of grievable that allows a bomb victim in Gaza to go unmourned. Butler is always looking at the system of norms and asking, who is this system killing?
Who is being erased?
Whose life is being made impossible, and then trying to stretch the frame, stretch the language, stretch the law, stretch our empathy to let those people in, to make their lives livable.
That is a powerful legacy, even if the prose is hard to read.
Even so.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked about a lot of heavy political stuff. But there is a concept from Butler's book, Giving an Account of Oneself, that I think is really beautiful on a personal, human level.
Ah, yes. The concept of opacity.
We live in a world that demands transparency. Tell me who you are. What is your identity? Put it in a bio. Kit yourself. We want a neat, clean story.
We want the elevator pitch of the soul. We want coherence. We want people to make sense to us instantly.
But Butler argues that we can never fully have that. Not for others, and not even for ourselves.
Right. Because we are formed by forces outside our control, by parents we didn't choose, by a language we didn't invent, by a history we didn't live through but that shaped us anyway, we can never fully know ourselves.
I am a mystery to myself.
You are opaque. You cannot tell a fully coherent story of you because you are a collision of a million things you don't even understand. There are gaps and contradictions in your own narrative.
That sounds anxious, like I don't have control.
But Butler flips it. Butler says, what if, instead of demanding total clarity from each other, explain yourself to me, justify your existence? We based our ethics on that shared mystery.
So I admit that I don't fully know myself, and because of that, I should be more gracious about the fact that you don't fully know yourself either.
Exactly. A humility born of opacity. We stop demanding that everyone fit into a box we can easily understand. We acknowledge that we are all unfinished, all dependent, all struggling with scripts we were handed at birth.
It is a call for a little less judgment and a little more acceptance of the messiness of being human.
Precisely. And in a world that wants to burn effigies and draw hard lines in the sand, that might be the most radical idea of all.
I love that. Thank you for unpacking this with me. This was a heavy one, but I feel like I finally understand why that effigy was burning and why those books are still flying off the shelves.
It was a pleasure. A real deep dive.
And thank you for listening to the deep dive. Go find some opacity in your life today. We'll see you next time.